go.
Alright, let's go. Come on.
I'm trying to get the crossroads going up.
A long time ago, to get anywhere, you walked. Then someone invented the wheel. The Romans built roads, much like this one here. Then someone put iron grooves in the roads for people to move their wagons on. That made it a lot easier. These grooves eventually became iron rails, and then, in the early 1800s, someone got the idea to put one of those on the front. And that is how the railroad came to be. Come on, let's go for a ride.
You gotta get on our train, man. Come on.
Let's just, come on. Nice pot-belly stove right in there. For heat. See if I can find any,
Do you want to sit across from her? That's a good spot. What?
These up here used to be oil lamps. I think they're electric now. Sit down. This is my works cited. This is my prior knowledge. There were a lot of railroads in the early days. Most of them started before the steam locomotive was even invented. Instead of steam locomotives, horses pulled carts along them. In 1802, in Scotland, a guy named some name I can't pronounce made a working prototype. These prototypes kept getting better and better. The first U.S. railroad was the Baltimore and Ohio, and here's the story of that. You see, back in the 1800s, the reason Baltimore was such a big city was because it was along the Chesapeake Bay, and there was a major seaport there. The issue was, people kept moving west, and they wanted goods out there, too, that they could only ship by sea, mainly. So, there were several canals back then, and that was the only way to transport freight. But the distance between Baltimore and then the Ohio River was too rocky and rugged for a canal. So they decided, and I'm quoting this book here, to build one of them newfangled railroad things. So the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was chartered to lay down rails between Baltimore and the Ohio River. They reached the Ohio River and they kept going. Through Ohio to Cincinnati, onward to Indiana, then to Illinois, and finally the B&O reached the Mississippi River. This was then the biggest river for shipping, and the biggest shipping method at period. They had all the steamboats on there. They built St. Louis to get to the Mississippi River, and back then St. Louis wasn't that big of a city, but when they built it, it grew to be a major trade center and started to resemble the city it is today. That happened in 1857. Other railroads had sprung up by then. Also by then, locomotives started to look like something we'd recognize today. After the Civil War was over, the government decided that trains were the way of the future. They signed the Pacific Rail Act. This created two railroads, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. The Union Pacific Railroad was going to build west from Omaha out this way, and then the Central Pacific Railroad will build from Sacramento out here in California out that way. Once they met, the country would be linked from coast to coast. To build this railroad was no easy task. The railroad companies brought in workers. A lot of the workers were Irish laborers who had served in the Civil War. Some of the workers were Chinese immigrants who had come to America to find work. Here was the work. The Chinese were able to save a fortune by their standards, and this led to a big influx of immigrants because they knew that not only could there be labor here, it was good labor. The two railroads met on May 10, 1869, at Promontory Point, Utah, in a ceremony in which a golden spike was driven. May 10th is still National Train Day in the U.S., and the Utah State Quarter has a depiction of the driving of the golden spike. There is still train service on this railroad. The rails have been replaced, but trains still run on the original grade and through the original tunnels. It was now possible to go from New York to San Francisco in less than 4 days. Before building this railroad, it would take many months by ship because the Panama Canal was not yet built, and the railroads just kept spreading all across the country and trains kept getting bigger and bigger.
Look at this thing here. This is a Union Pacific big boy. It's a 4884 locomotive, and that is as big as they got. Unfortunately, the steam locomotives did not last very long. They were soon replaced by diesel locomotives. Let's see, like that one. Or this one. These made it cleaner and faster and easier to travel. And big emphasis on the cleaner part down here.
Steam locomotives fell, and the diesel and electric locomotives took over.
So that is the history of trains. Trains intersect with every aspect of our daily lives, and we have trains that go all around the country.
If you want to know the time, a sundial is a pretty accurate method of timekeeping. In the age of railroads, sundials were long obsolete, replaced by regular geared clocks. But the Earth still turns, and this means that the sun is in different places all over the world, and even around our now bigger and more accessible country. Every community still set their clocks by what their sundials had said earlier in the years past, so every community had their own time. This led to a lot of confusion.
Alright, we're here, about time. Huh. Well, this was the noon train. Why is it?
So the railroads started setting standardized time zones to avoid this confusion. Anyone who's traveled knows the effect that they can have on people, but at least it's not really bright at midnight or pitch black at 10 a.m. because everyone around the world has the same time. And imagine if you live in a separate community kind of far from the school. You might be late for school because your time would be different than the school's time.
Oh boy, yummy pizza. See, they make pizza in Italy and then ship it across the ocean by train to America, and some of you actually believed that. But no, they don't do that. There's milk and wheat here in Pennsylvania to make the cheese and the crust, but the tomato sauce and the tomatoes the pepperonis had to come from somewhere, and the soda definitely came from somewhere else. So those things were probably all shipped by train.
For the first few years of their existence, trains did not ship many perishable products. Then someone in 1860 started to experiment with refrigerator cars, or icebox cars, but they're the same thing, functionally. From the late 1800s on, now they could ship food by train. Now people could eat foods that they couldn't previously. Before this invention of refrigerator cars, a lot of people didn't know what some foods taste like. And as I pointed out, we might not have pizza and soda in Pennsylvania without them. Now some of you are probably thinking, Mike, can't they just use a truck to ship all that stuff? The first answer is no, they didn't have really good highways back in the 1800s. The other answer is they probably do nowadays, but think about it, that's not as efficient as it would be shipping it by train, but it is more convenient to ship it by truck, because you can get it to places where you can go. The solution to this is a train such as this one, an intermodal train. When it comes by, have a look at it. We have truck trailers and shipping containers. This is more efficient than moving it by trucks. And as CSX says in their commercials that we see,
our trains can move a ton of freight 423 miles on 1 gallon of fuel. See?
Now we are going to discuss some wars.
I
am going to start with the Civil War.
you should all know what happened in the Civil War. Basically, the people up north didn't want there to be slavery, and the people in the south did, and so the south tried to secede, and there was a war. The Union Army from the north and the Confederate Army from the south met at Gettysburg, which was a big turning point in the war. In 1860, there were about 30,000 miles of railroad in the U.S.
I've been to Gettysburg a whole bunch of times. One time, we were there on a scout trip, and I went to the museum. I noticed in the museum they had these displays of where all the soldiers were from, and I noticed a bunch of them were from Utah or California or somewhere way out west. And we were all making jokes like, hey, maybe they marched all the way out here, and then they got here and found that the war was over. But then the guy there said, no, that's not what happened. They marched some of the way, and then rode on railroads out here the rest of the way. So if it weren't for railroads, a bunch more people wouldn't have been fighting at the Battle of Gettysburg, and we may have lost it. And I know Gettysburg was a turning point in the Civil War, so I'm no Civil War historian, but you can ask one of them, and they'll tell you what the South and North would look like if the South had won the Civil War.
The railroads had an effect on the world long after the Civil War. This looks scary, doesn't it? This is a railway gun. Just knowing that the enemy had a gun this big would be enough to scare the railway spikes out of me. Imagine what it could do when it shot. But that was far from the only use for railways in warfare. There were plenty of war manufacturing plants across the country, but when the material needed to head for Europe or the Pacific, they put it on a train. They could move whole divisions this way. I could explain this further, but I think these clips of a World War II film will do a better job than I could.
Into effect.
Yes, sir. This is Colonel Fitz, Army Ground Forces. The commanding general has decided to move the 201st Armored Division by rail. Alert traffic control and everyone concerned.
Tell me where this train is going.
No, sir, soldier. That's one thing I'm now allowed to tell.
So if it were not for railroads, we might not have done as well in World Wars I or World War II either. Well, it's time for me to fly off into the wild blue yonder. Or is that the wrong transportation method? Oh well.
Mike, come with me.
You're good! There it is.
Watch your feet. This is a cow field.
But yeah, thanks. Gonna blow your whistle or what?
It blew its whistle. There's a guy filming us.
You know, I bet I probably could jump on there if I wanted to.
No. That's illegal.
It's illegal. It's illegal. Alright, I'm getting back in.
All right.